The first thing they found was the boat. It was drifting slowly through the blackwater, bumping softly against the cypress knees, as if something inside it had tried to escape and failed. There were no bullet holes, no claw marks, no signs of a struggle. Just a dark smear across the aluminum bench seat, thick and half-dried under the Florida sun. Blood looks almost black when it dries in swamp heat. The radio was still on. Soft static whispering into the trees. The Everglades were quiet in that unnatural way that makes your skin tighten. No birds, no insects, just water stretching in every direction like a sheet of oil. The rescue team assumed it was an accident at first. 3 experienced anglers don't just vanish. Not in open water, not in daylight. But this wasn't open water. This was breeding season, and the locals had warned them. The largest male in that stretch of swamp had been seen for weeks, 13 feet at least. Thick skull, scarred back, territorial, aggressive. They laughed when the bait shop owner told them to avoid the Western Channel. Said they'd handled gators before. Said they weren't tourists. The problem with men who think they understand predators is that they start testing limits. According to the one survivor, it started with a splash. Not a violent one, just a heavy displacement of water behind the boat. They thought it was a submerged log, shifting in the current. Then the boat tilted slightly to the left, just enough to make one of them swear. The water there isn't clear, it isn't green, it's black. You don't see what's under you. You imagine it. And imagination is worse. They began casting closer to the reeds, laughing about who would hook the biggest bass. That's when Mark decided to throw a line toward a floating mound near the bank. He said it looked like debris, maybe driftwood. He wanted to snag it and clear the casting lane. The hook didn't catch wood. It sank. Then it moved. Slow at first, then deliberate. The line tightened. The rod bent, and the mound opened an eye. The survivor said that was the moment everything changed. The water around the boat seemed to thicken. Heavy, pressurized. Mark tried to reel back, but whatever he'd hooked didn't fight like a fish. It didn't thrash. It didn't run. It turned. The boat shifted again. A ripple spread outward, wide and controlled. And then the head surfaced. Massive, dark, ancient, scars across the snout. Yellow eye locked onto the source of the tension. Breeding males don't flee. They eliminate threats. Mark panicked. Instead of cutting the line, he yanked harder. The hook tore free. The splash that followed wasn't loud. It was final. The gator didn't roar. It didn't hiss. It disappeared. And for 30 seconds, nothing happened. That silence was the warning. The first strike came from below. The boat lifted, physically lifted, on one side as something slammed into it with enough force to knock Chris overboard. He didn't even scream at first. He hit the water hard, surfaced once, and that was when the red spread. Fast. Too fast. The survivor said he saw the tail. Not the teeth, not the jaws, just the tail cutting through the black surface like a blade. The boat rocked violently. Mark reached down with shaking hands, trying to grab Chris, but something pulled him sideways. The water erupted. A snap. A sound like thick wood splitting. Then silence again. 2 men gone in less than 10 seconds? The survivor froze. That's what he told the rangers. He said he couldn't move, couldn't think. The swamp felt smaller, closed in. He grabbed the motor, trying to start it, but his hands were slick. The engine coughed once, twice. Behind him, the water formed a slow, V-shape. Not rushing, not frantic. Approaching. That's when he made his second mistake. He reached for the rifle under the seat. Locals carry them during mating season. He turned. He aimed at movement he couldn't fully see. And he fired into the water. The shot echoed through the swamp and then dissolved into emptiness. For a moment, he believed it worked. The V-shape vanished. The surface went flat. He started the engine. This time it caught. The boat lurched forward. He didn't look back. Not once. He told rescuers the attack was random, sudden, unprovoked. But the hook wound found later in the massive male's jaw told a different story. And what the search team doesn't say out loud, what they only whisper, is that breeding males don't stop after one confrontation. Once challenged, once wounded, they patrol harder. They remember. And the blackwater keeps secrets until it doesn't. By the time the sun began to sink, the swamp had already decided who belonged there and who didn't. The search boats moved slowly through the western channel, cutting thin paths through the black surface, their engines low and cautious. Rangers had marked the coordinates where the drifting boat was found, but water in the Everglades doesn't hold still. It shifts, it swallows, it rearranges truth. Deputy Harris stood at the bow of the lead boat, scanning the reeds with binoculars that felt useless in a place where danger lived beneath the surface. He'd worked this territory for 12 years. He knew the difference between a feeding strike and a defensive one. This hadn't been feeding. The blood loss was too violent. The drag pattern in the water too controlled. Something had hit with intent. The survivor, Ethan Cole, sat wrapped in a thermal blanket at the ranger station miles away, repeating the same version of events. Sudden attack. No warning. No provocation. But Harris had already seen the photographs from the wildlife unit. A large male had been spotted days earlier near that exact channel. 13 feet, maybe more, heavy skull, scar tissue across the snout. And now, fresh damage, metal lodged deep in the lower jaw. A hook tear. In breeding season, males don't just defend territory. They dominate it. And pain changes behavior. The second boat slowed as they approached a narrow bend where cypress roots twisted like exposed ribs along the bank. That's when they saw it. A swirl, wide, deliberate. Not a panicked thrash. A circle. Harris lifted a hand, signaling the engine to cut. Silence rolled back in, thick and suffocating. Even the insects seemed to hold their breath. One of the younger rangers whispered that it was probably just a submerged log shifting in the current. Harris didn't answer. Logs don't track boats. The surface broke 50 feet to their right. Not fully. Just enough for the ridge of a back to crest above the waterline. Dark. Scarred. Immense. It didn't flee. It paralleled them. Matching speed without effort. The second boat tried to reposition, but the wake from the first drifted outward, rippling through the reeds. That's when the male submerged again. Harris felt the shift in his chest before he saw it. The water beneath them tightened, pressurized, like something massive displacing space below the hull. "Keep steady," he said, though his voice carried less authority than he wanted. The strike didn't come at the side, it came from below. A violent upward surge slammed into the underside of the lead boat, lifting the bow high enough to throw Harris backward. The impact cracked fiberglass. One of the crew lost his footing and smashed into the console. The second boat revved instinctively, but the narrow channel gave them no room to maneuver. The water erupted beside them, A jaw surfaced this time, wide, pale interior flashing for half a second before snapping shut on empty air. Warning, not a kill. The male circled again, slower now, testing, measuring. He wasn't hunting out of hunger. He was erasing a threat. Harris scrambled to his knees and fired a warning shot into the water, not to kill, but to drive distance. The report echoed hard against the trees. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the tail surfaced, thick as a tree trunk, slamming sideways into the hull. The younger ranger screamed as the boat tipped sharply, taking on water. The second crew fired 2 controlled shots toward the shadow beneath the surface. 1 bullet struck. They knew because the water churned instantly, not in panic, but in fury. The male breached halfway this time, body twisting with violent power. Harris saw the hook wound clearly now, raw, torn flesh along the jawline. Infected, angry, personal. The gator crashed back down and vanished into the black. Engines roared. Both boats reversed awkwardly, trying to widen the gap. For a long 10 seconds, nothing followed. Then the swamp exhaled. Birds exploded from distant trees. Insects resumed their hum. But Harris understood something the others hadn't yet processed. This was no longer recovery. It was escalation. The male had not retreated far. He had marked them. Territory violated once by fishermen, violated again by gunfire, wounded twice in the span of days. Predators adapt fast. Injured predators adapt faster. Back at the station, Ethan Cole asked quietly if they had found the bodies. No one answered him directly. Harris stepped outside instead, staring at the darkening horizon where the swamp met the falling sun. Night in the Everglades doesn't arrive gently, it drops. And when it does, vision disappears, but movement doesn't. Harris gave the order to suspend surface search until morning. Officially, it was about safety. Unofficially, he knew they were being studied. Somewhere in that black water, the male waited. Not feeding, not fleeing, guarding. And now, because of a hook and 2 bullets, the territory line had been redrawn. Tomorrow they would return with heavier equipment, stronger rifles, reinforced hulls. But tonight, the swamp belonged entirely to what moved beneath it. And injured males don't forget the shape of a boat. Night didn't fall over the Everglades. It sealed it. The last line of orange vanished behind the sawgrass, and the swamp became a flat sheet of darkness, where distance stopped existing. The search team returned at dawn with reinforced aluminum hulls, heavier rifles, and a professional hunter, contracted from the Wildlife Commission, a quiet man named Keller, who had removed problem gators before. He studied the photographs of the male in silence, zooming in on the torn jaw, the scarred snout, the width of the skull. "He's not feeding," Keller finally said. "He's holding ground." Harris didn't need it explained. Holding ground meant defending breeding territory. It meant aggression without warning. It meant the swamp itself had become a perimeter. They tracked the last known coordinates and moved deeper into the western channel, where the water narrowed and the reeds grew taller, blocking wind, blocking sightlines, blocking escape. The engine noise felt intrusive, like a challenge thrown into something ancient. Ethan insisted on coming. He said he could identify the exact bend where Mark cast his line. Harris didn't want him there, but guilt has a gravity of its own. It drags men back to the place where things went wrong. The channel tightened into what locals called the Red Channel, not for blood, but for the rust-colored tannins that stained the surface when the sun hit right. Today, the water was flat and black. Keller signaled to cut the engine. They drifted. He pointed to the bank where reeds were flattened unnaturally low, pressed outward as if something heavy had slid repeatedly between land and water. A haul-out point. Fresh. The mud was still wet. Keller whispered that males patrol predictable loops during breeding season, but once injured, they alter patterns. He'll circle wide, he said. He'll approach from blind angle. As if summoned by the words, a ripple formed 30 yards behind them. Subtle, controlled. Not the erratic movement of smaller gators. Harris felt the same tightening in his chest as the day before. Keller raised his rifle but didn't fire. "Wait," he breathed. The ripple vanished. The water returned to glass. Then the boat shifted. Not from the side, from beneath. A heavy scrape dragged along the hull, metal vibrating under something dense and muscular. Ethan's breath became shallow. Harris motioned him back, but the movement was too late. The strike came without a surface warning. A violent upward explosion lifted the stern, throwing Keller forward. His rifle discharged into the air as he fell. The impact tore a seam along the underside, water rushing in immediately. The second boat, positioned 30 feet out, tried to close distance, but the channel was too narrow to maneuver quickly. The male surfaced this time with full intent. His head broke through inches from Ethan, jaws opening wide enough to swallow the side rail. The teeth weren't exaggerated like in stories. They were thick, conical, built for crushing. He didn't snap immediately. He held, testing resistance. Then he rolled. The boat twisted violently as the death roll began, metal screeching against torque. Ethan lost his footing and slammed into the rail, his forearm dropping into the water for half a second too long. The jaws closed, not fully, but enough. The sound wasn't a bite. It was compression. Ethan screamed as Keller fired point-blank into the skull ridge. One shot, two. The third penetrated near the eye. The male released and vanished in a burst of foam and red streaks that spread fast across the surface. Ethan collapsed backward, his arm shredded but attached. Blood poured freely, bright against the black water. Harris wrapped a tourniquet with shaking hands as the second boat finally reached them. "He'll come back," Keller said, voice low, eyes scanning constantly. "He's not dead." And he was right. Injured males don't retreat far from territory. They submerge. They wait. The water around them began to move again, wider now, slower, circling. The channel felt smaller by the second. Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness as they transferred him to the second boat. The damaged hull began sinking lower, stern nearly level with the surface. Keller refused to leave it immediately. "If he takes the boat under, he'll claim it," he muttered, as if the animal operated on ownership. Another swirl formed ahead, cutting off the narrowest exit of the channel. The male surfaced halfway, one eye clouded with blood, jaw torn, and hanging slightly off alignment from the hook wound and fresh gunfire. He wasn't retreating. He was blocking. Harris raised his rifle, but Keller stopped him. "Head or spine? Nothing else matters." The male submerged again, disappearing into his own shadow. Seconds stretched. The damaged boat groaned as water filled compartments. Then the surface detonated directly beside Keller. The gator launched with the last of his explosive power, body slamming into the hull sideways. Keller fired into the open mouth this time, the barrel nearly swallowed by the jaws. The recoil threw him backward, but the shot landed deep. The male convulsed, thrashing with such force that both boats rocked violently. The tail whipped across the surface, striking Ethan's boat hard enough to spin it sideways. Harris lost grip on his footing and nearly went overboard before grabbing the console. The water churned red, not spreading this time, thick, concentrated. The thrashing slowed, then stopped. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The swamp was silent again, but not empty. Keller kept the rifle trained on the surface for nearly a full minute before lowering it. The massive body floated up slowly, turning sideways, one eye open but lifeless. The hook wound, still visible. The bullet wound deep in the skull. Territory reclaimed at a cost. Ethan drifted unconscious, pulse weak but present. Harris looked at the floating male and felt no triumph, only a heavy understanding. The fishermen hadn't been hunted for food. They had crossed a boundary and pulled steel through living flesh during breeding season. Pain rewires instinct. Instinct escalates violence, and in Blackwater, escalation spreads fast. As they towed the body toward open channel, Harris noticed something else moving at the edge of the reeds. Smaller shapes, juveniles, watching. The red channel wasn't empty, it was generational. And territory doesn't stay vacant for long. They towed the body at half speed, the massive weight dragging a dark wake through the channel, as if the swamp itself resisted letting go. The male was longer than initial estimates, closer to 14 feet, thick through the torso, scarred from years of territorial battles. Up close, he looked less like a monster and more like something engineered by time and pressure, muscle layered over bone built for a world without mercy. Ethan was airlifted before sunset, his arm stabilized but permanently damaged. He would live. Mark and Chris would not be recovered intact. In water that warm, in territory that controlled, recovery meant fragments. Harris stood on the dock as wildlife officials measured the carcass, photographed the hook wound, logged the ballistic entries, and prepared the official statement. Defensive attack during breeding season, escalated due to prior injury. Clean words, clinical words, words that made it sound finished. But Harris had worked long enough in the Everglades to understand that nothing here truly ends. It shifts, it redistributes. By the time the sun dipped low again, the swamp had resumed its natural rhythm. Birds returned, insects screamed in the reeds. The surface of the western channel went flat, black, reflective, too calm. Keller washed blood from his boots without speaking. When Harris asked if it was over, he didn't answer immediately. He stared at the distant reeds where they had seen the smaller silhouettes earlier. "You removed the dominant male," Keller finally said. "You didn't remove the territory." That night, Harris reviewed Ethan's full statement again, this time slower. Under sedation, guilt loosened his memory. The truth slipped out between painkillers and regret. Mark hadn't just snagged debris. He'd aimed at the gator deliberately after spotting the back ridge near the bank. He wanted a reaction, a story, proof they'd hooked something prehistoric. They'd laughed when the line tightened. They'd pulled harder when it resisted. They'd celebrated when it surfaced angry. And when the hook tore free, the male didn't attack immediately. He submerged. He assessed. The first strike came only after the rifle was raised, after the challenge was made visible. Harris closed the report and stepped outside. The air was thick and humid, wrapping around him like wet cloth. The dock creaked under his boots, as he stared into the water below. Even here, near the station, the surface reflected nothing but darkness. He tried to imagine the sequence from the gator's perspective. Steel in flesh, pain in jaw, intruders in breeding ground, gunshot, blood. Territory isn't an emotion, it's a law. Break it, and something answers. 2 nights later, a call came in from a trapper working the outer reeds near the same channel. He reported aggressive movement around his skiff. Harris drove out before dawn with a smaller team. They didn't find a 14-foot male this time. They found something else. Fresh tracks along the mudbank, multiple slides, smaller bodies entering and exiting the water repeatedly. One track was noticeably larger than the rest, not as massive as the dead male, but thick enough to suggest rapid growth. Keller crouched beside the prints and pressed his palm into the mud beside them. "Nature fills gaps fast," he said quietly. Harris scanned the black water and felt it again. That tightening pressure beneath stillness. No surface break, no ripple, just presence. The official narrative would close the case. The dominant male was eliminated, threat neutralized, public safety restored. But the swamp didn't operate on paperwork. It operated on vacancy and succession. The fishermen had crossed a line thinking they were above the rules of that place. The rescue team crossed it again with gunfire. The result wasn't evil, it wasn't vengeance, it was balance, recalibrating violently. Harris looked down at the water one last time before leaving the channel. For a split second he thought he saw movement beneath the reflection. Slow, deliberate, measuring distance. Maybe it was imagination. Maybe it wasn't. The Everglades don't warn twice. They don't roar before striking. They wait. They let arrogance drift close. And when steel pierces flesh in breeding season, the response is not chaos. It's correction. The Western Channel will reopen to fishermen within weeks. New boats, new laughter, new lines cast into water that looks empty. The black surface will stay calm. It always does. Because what the water keeps isn't anger. It keeps memory. And somewhere beneath that mirror-dark skin, something younger is already learning the shape of a hull.